Working on it. Hopefully we're getting there. All right. I see myself on my laptop, which is frightening. Let me just do a check with Sam behind the scenes here. And I'm coming right back. All right, sorry about that. It's weird. We've had this system going pretty well for a few months now, and all of a sudden tonight there's cameras connected to a box, the box is connected to the interwebs, blah, 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 and suddenly the box didn't want to communicate with the World Wide Web. So enough of that, let's jump in. John says, and welcome to a snowy Thursday night here in Wisconsin. Oh my gosh, what a weather calamity we had. So I will preface our event with this. The weather is so crazy. I'm flying solo tonight. It was advisable for Ginny. She lives about 20 miles from here, and the weather is so hinky. We got like 12 inches of snow, a bunch of ice, really, really high winds, and it was just not a good night for her to drive here for this. So I will move the camera on my own. That's why Ginny's not here. Okay. And just checking. Okay. Let me do one more thing. I'm back. John says, sorry about this. I hate these technical problems. I want us to start at 7 and go seamlessly. I just ordered a small jointer, or did I order a joiner? Can you explain the difference? So the right word, let's do a show and tell. The right word for holding me up. For that thing, that Laguna tool right there, is a jointer with a T in there. And the reason for that, jointer, is that we use it very commonly to create glue joints. So jointer, John, is the right terminology for that. Joiner, biscuit, like a biscuit joiner, that's a different thing because we're joining pieces. But the jointer is for creating joints, so there should be a T in there. Question, is there an easy way to make dovetails, or is it just a matter of practice? Would you recommend a dovetail router jig? So, easy way to make dovetails. There's a lot of it depends. There are people who very much want to cut all their dovetails by hand. And cutting dovetails by hand is a pretty difficult procedure, but it can be mastered. Playing guitar is difficult, playing piano is difficult. A lot of things are difficult, but if you practice them enough, you'll get proficient at it. So with dovetails, a shortcut to success, I think, is using a router jig. That being said, there can be some limitations with router jigs. For instance, many router jigs have combs, the fingers that your router follows, in fixed positions, and you can't vary that. If you lay it out and cut it by hand, or you do bandsaw dovetails, which I did on Facebook Live today, you can create whatever spacing you want. Even when we get to a router in a dovetail jig, there are things you need to know, there are things that you need to learn. So it's not, what I don't like about some aspects of woodworking is like what I've called the gizmoization of woodworking. Some of you might have heard me say this before, which is, if I just buy this thing, then I'll be really good at this. And the analogy I often use is I play acoustic guitar, and if I buy a $5,000 Martin guitar instead of a $160 Walmart guitar, it'll be easier to play, but it doesn't make me a better guitar player. I still have to practice. So dovetail jig, hand cut, regardless of your approach, it's going to take some practice. There's no super easy path to that. If you had a small shop, say 12 by 16, what 4 or 5 tools would you recommend must-haves? Okay, so and so then the second part of the question is, I purchased a lot of rough lumber and have a planer. Would you recommend a jointer, or is it okay to joint boards with a table saw or router? So we can answer 2 questions together here, because in my list of 4 or 5 tools you should have: table saw, easy, router table, handheld router, random orbit sander. Well, I don't really know what number I'm on, I'm not really counting. And the benefit, part of the benefit to a router table is you can edge joint on a router table. So you can get a lot of, not just double duty out of a router table, but like quadruple bazillion duty out of a router table, because they're so versatile, there's so much you can do. So those are the main tools I'd put in. And if I didn't have a jointer, and I'd say, especially if you're working with pieces commonly that are 4 feet long and less, you could plane them, and then you could do your edge jointing on a router table. Someday, probably want to go into a jointer, because the benefit of face jointing before planing is knowing you're getting your material dead flat. And that's a really good thing. So eventually I have a jointer on the list somewhere, but you can go without it for a while. Bill says, I have a piece of koa that I'm unable to prevent excessive tear out. It's tearing out even with scraper or sandpaper. What would be the best method to fill these areas? It's a unique piece of wood. I'd like to save it. Any suggestions? Boy, I've never heard of wood tearing with sandpaper. My go-to on dicey woods is to send them through my Supermax, my sander, instead of my planer. To fill these areas, man, I mean, if they're big chunks torn out, I don't know how you're going to not make it obvious. I would experiment in a really small spot with CA glue, cyanoacrylate glue. Cyanoacrylate mixed with a little koa sawdust, and see how that does for you. That might be the most benign way to fill those spots in. What's the difference between a hardback or flexback bandsaw blade? I do not know. Robert asks, need to make drawer slides. Any suggestions? I've never made drawer slides, so nope, sorry. Norman asked, I've been adding hand planes to my Shopsmith arsenal. How do you integrate this hybrid into your woodworking? I don't too often. I taught nothing but hand tool joinery in Africa with Peace Corps for almost 3 years. When I got back, I fell right back into my power tool addiction. Now that being said, I recently bought a lovely Lee Nielsen block plane. I want to say it's a 120 or something like that. I love this little guy. And I use a block plane a lot. My friend Paul Mayer, who also writes and does video for WWGOA, he's way more of a hand tool guy, and he's more prone than I to, if he's got a big tabletop, he might hand plane that surface. At this stage, for me in my woodworking, it doesn't happen. So I'm not a great one to answer your question. I like using hand tools here and there, but I don't do a bunch of it. So I don't know. Mark Spagnolo, who's the Wood Whisperer, he's got a book called Hybrid Woodworking, and it's all about the crossover. Mark's a real nice guy. The book is all about crossing over your power tool and your hand tool collections and having them augment each other. So that Hybrid Woodworking book, a look. Hello, AJ. David says, I live in Florida. I recently built a flip-top cart to mount my thickness planer and miter saw. My first experience using what I thought was good plywood. 2 4x8 sheets of birch for 53 bucks a piece. Was disappointed in it. The outer layers are extremely thin. Laminations don't appear to have had much glue. Warping. And then help please. Well, home center plywood is home center plywood. Here in Wisconsin, red oak plywood from home centers is about 45 bucks a sheet. Red oak plywood I get from my hardwood and plywood supplier is about 60 bucks a sheet, and it's 80 billion times better. Better core quality, better veneer, thicker veneer. So my recommendation would be, there's spots where using that low-end plywood, you might be okay getting away with it. But in most cases, really what you want to do is look for a hardwood supplier that sells plywood, and call them, ask them if you can go in and retail buy 1 or 2 or 3 sheets, so you don't have to buy a huge stack of it. But you will be so impressed with what you get from that kind of a source. Also, it'd be nice to have 3/4 inch plywood that's 3/4. That ain't ever going to happen. And I'm okay with that, because think about the process. So when you make plywood, we're going to take all these internal cores, like 7 of them, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, build them up. So they're a certain thickness. Then we're going to put glue in there, and then we're going to put a piece of veneer on there that's like a 1/24 of an inch thick. So to get all that to add up to exactly 3/4, forget about it. It's going to be really tough to have happen. So plywood is undersized, and it's going to be undersized, and that's something we just have to work around. Dan says, I look at dedicated wood lathes and compare them to a Shopsmith and wonder how sturdy in large turnings, such as 12-inch diameter, is the Shopsmith compared to dedicated lathes. Yeah, I owned Shopsmiths for a really long time, and yes, I'm saying that plurally on purpose. Hang on, I got to throw a note on YouTube because the video's not playing there, so I'm just going to let people know. I'm giving them a link so they can come join us here. Okay. All right. So I did a lot of turning on the Shopsmith. What I really like about it is the variable speed is crazy cool. It could go slower. I think the low end on a Shopsmith is about 500 RPM. Plenty of high-end speed. Power is okay. I think it's a 1-horse motor in there, if I remember right. They're very light. So I very quickly in my turning got into greenwood turning, and that often means like I'm grabbing a chunk. This maple bowl in its first life was a log from the compost pile. So when this goes onto the lathe, it's pretty eccentric. It's pretty out of round. The Shopsmith isn't great for that. I remember throwing sandbags across it just to help it sit while I was getting something roughed out. But they're honestly not a bad lathe. Up to 12 inches in diameter, that's pretty good. You know, you'll be okay there, especially if you take the time to really round out your blank before you start turning. Brian says, the other day you had a post about your router Dado jig. Could you show it on video? Router Dado jig. I can't. If you're still on, Brian, give me a little more info, because I can't. I'm looking around at jigs hanging on the walls, and I probably got 10 jigs that use a router and cut a dado. So if you've got a little more info that can zero it in, we'll go from there. Matthew says, I've asked your support staff, but how do you manage cutting diagrams, calculating for kerf when cutting boards for projects? I don't really. I mean, on sheet goods, I use Cut List Plus. Bridgewood Design is the company, software company. Cut List Plus is the particular software. So if I'm doing a kitchen that's going to have lots and lots and lots of case parts in it, cut from sheet goods, I put all those parts into the Cut List software and I press go, and it lays them all out onto sheets. When I do it with, when I'm just working with boards, then I just do it as I go. So I need whatever pieces that are 3 inches wide and 42 inches long for rails on a table. I grab a piece of wood. Am I going to get one rail out of this, 2 rails out of this, cut and go? So I'm not like compensating for kerf. I'm just measuring the board. And if I need 2 3-inch pieces, I know the board's got to be like 6.5 to have enough allowance. So I'm just doing that very quickly in my head. I don't do any kind of specific layout. Well, Daniel, I got to mess with the computer because that's how I communicate. So it's how I double check to make sure the whole system is working. Rodney says, wondering if you could talk about finishing a live edge bowl still on the lathe or not. Live edge bowl. So here's one that's got a nice saddle shape to it. So I don't know, talk about finishing it on the lathe. I mean, that's what I always do. So I guess maybe if where you're going with this is these things are zinging around, how do you do your finishing? So with something that's this much of a natural rim, I'll probably get a lot of finish on here while it's not turning. And then do some polishing while it's spinning. This is a live edge on this one. This is still the outside of the tree. And that one, I'm comfortable to have that running while I do everything. So, is that what you're looking for, Rodney? If you have any concern about, the edges are irregular and it's going to catch your hand, then just finish it by hand without the lathe running. Rub the finish on, rub the finish out, but don't run the machine. Steven asks, what's the best glue for moderate gap filling? It's really epoxy is the best way to go. Cyanoacrylate has some gap filling, CA glue has some gap filling capabilities, but yeah, if you've got gapicity, so here's the deal. Yellow glues, like this, will gap fill up to about 3/1000ths of an inch, about the thickness of a piece of paper. Polyurethane glue, which is the stuff that have moisture present, polyurethane glue, it's got to have moisture present in order to cure. This will gap fill up to about 12/1000ths, so 4 pieces of paper. But if you've got something that's really gappier than that, epoxy, 2-part epoxy is the best way to go. How can I get a plate for my Delta table saw that is an 1/8 inch thick? Like an insert? 1/8 inch hardboard? Plain a piece of hard maple or some other hardwood to 1/8 inch. I don't know. That'd be table insert. I'd probably lean more toward a piece of hardwood, like hard maple, than I would masonite for that. Amherst says, I've got a flat top tooth blade, flat top grind, I guess, for my table saw for narrow rabbet cuts for a jigsaw table I'm making. Cuts a nice clean slot. Is this blade limited in use due to the nature of the teeth? I notice after cutting wood shaving to adhere to the teeth at times. No, I've got a flat top grind. Let me see if it's right here, I'll grab it. Yeah, so my flat top, here I come. My flat top grind is a rip blade, 24 tooth rip blade, and I also use it, so the benefit to this is that if we look at the top of the teeth, flat top grind, FTG, the teeth are in fact flat. So on an alternate top bevel, you've got tooth to the left, tooth to the right, tooth to the left. There's a very typical traditional set to the teeth. If you cut a groove with that, it's not flat bottom. Now if it's an internal groove that nobody's going to see, who cares? If you're cutting slots for splines in the corner of a box, it's going to be ugly with an alternate top bevel because the spline you push in there isn't going to seat in the bottom. Same thing with a triple chip. The triple chip tooth, which is kind of tombstone shaped, is typically a little higher than the rest of the teeth, and so it leaves that detent, that indentation in the bottom of the curve. So a flat top grind will leave you a perfectly flat bottomed curve, great for splining. Additionally, I also use this for just general ripping. So on your blade, as long as it's the right blade, again, that's a 24 tooth blade, so it's designed to be a blade, and it's a flat top grind. So just depending on what your tooth count is, you could use it for other stuff. My sable saw has been starting to act up to the point I have to push or pull my wood through. I have a new blade in. Any suggestions? I would check the fence. If the blade is good, maybe your fence is out of alignment with the blade. And that's the other thing that would cause that binding. Oh, John says the audio's breaking up. Is that anybody else? I'm scrolling down fast to see if anybody else says. Yeah, I'm just checking my connections. And then I'm going to do this. Sometimes what sounds like the mic breaking up is it the lathe here rubbing. So let me just do a redo. And we'll see. Sorry if that's rubbing like crazy and making you nuts. We'll try that. All right, Alan says, with wood suppliers, Lowe's is basically it here in Eastern North Carolina. Nearest hardwood supplier is 3 hours away. Well, yeah, so that's unfortunate. Then I've intentionally moved away from home center plywood. I used to buy it for all my classes. And then I've moved away from it just because of the quality issues that you're talking about. Jim says, can you edge joint a long board on a router table? I haven't been able to make it work. I always get a bow. So you can, and it's, as a general rule of thumb, and that's what, when I was talking about using the router table as a jointer earlier, I said if you're using stuff up to about 4 feet long, that's somewhere around there is your limitation. I would say if you take the length of your fence, router table fence, and approximately double it or so, that's about the longest board you can do. So when Jim says, can you edge joint a long board, if you're talking about 8 feet, probably not, because the fence is so short. So even on a jointer, I'm pointing to mine, even on a joiner, if you have a bench top joiner that's only this long, you can't joint 8-foot stock because it's basically, you have such a short, straight surface that all you're going to do is follow the bow. That's where you need a longer bed. It's a benefit to a longer bed. Evangelist says, what's the advantage of oldies oil over tung oil? I have zero idea. I've never heard of oldies oil. Brian says, the router jig for cutting dados for shelves. Well, I'll pull one out. If I just got to think, well, Ginny did a bunch of cleaning when I was recently out of town, so some things I moved around a little. Let me look. Let's try this one while I drop stuff. I was teaching down in Indianapolis. What a great experience that was. But I was gone for about a week, and boy, did Ginny do a great job while I was gone, taking care of the shop, one, getting work done, two, and cleaning. She did a lot of organizing. So is this the one you mean, Brian? The way this one works, Dado jig, you use it in conjunction with a pattern style router bit. So the leaf on this side is fastened to the head, so that's permanently fixed. And this has to be perfectly perpendicular. Then on this side, when I loosen this and this, we can open this or close it. So the way it works is whatever you're using as your shelf, you put in here, squeeze, lock it in place, and you create this gutter, this hole that's exactly the width of your part, exactly the thickness of your part. And then pattern style bit, it's got a bearing on the top. The cutter below it is exactly the same diameter. So when we use that to cut this, we're just tracing the gutter, and as a result, you're going to get a perfectly sized dado. This one is long enough that I can get a 24-inch piece in between, because base cupboards, kitchen cabinet base cabinets, are typically 23 1/4 inches deep. So it's long enough to accommodate a 23 1/4 inch, 23 1/4 inch carcass. But that's the gist of how it works. You want to use a pattern style bit that's slightly smaller in diameter than the thickness of what you're cutting for. So for typical 3/4 inch plywood stuff, I use a 5/8 inch diameter pattern bit. Phil says, one of the major problems in Oklahoma is finding wood. As you just said, home center plywood isn't great. What do you suggest? I would call cabinet shops, because I'm pretty sure cabinet shops building custom kitchen cabinets are not buying their stuff from home centers. And one, you can ask them where they get their material. Two, ask them if they'll sell a sheet or two. They're probably buying a unit of plywood is, depending on what it is, somewhere around 40 sheets, 45 sheets. So a big cabinet shop could be buying 45 sheets at a time, which also means they're getting really good pricing. So ask them if they'd sell you a sheet or two, and go from there. What's the project you are most proud of? Yes. I don't know. You know, I've been asked this a bunch of times, and I don't think I have an answer, because when I make something, it's like in that moment, I mean, I've got stuff I've screwed up that I forget about, but in that moment with that project that's going well, it's this, you know, it's sort of this Zen thing. You get wrapped up in the project, and then you're proud of it when it's done. And so the crib I made, which was a Rockler plan that all three of my kids slept in, that was very cool. The 15-foot fishing boat I built in the mid-'80s, that was really cool. This bowl was really cool because it wasn't spalted when I put the wood away. So that was a really neat aspect of that. I did a Bombay style chest of drawers for Minwax at one point for an advertising campaign. That was cool. I was asked to teach at the Pentagon for a couple of years. That was pretty cool. So there's just, everything has got its thing, you know? And as that part of that project, that whatever that thing is really neat. And I don't think I could pick a thing. Ideal location on a custom-made router table for the center of a router from the edge of the table. Every router table I've ever had, it's just centered. So if the table is 24 by 30, the router bit's coming up at 12 and 15. Stan says, I was going to suggest cut list and cut list bridge for SketchUp. Yeah, I haven't tried I'm using SketchUp, but I haven't tried the cut diagram part of SketchUp yet. I got to do that. Can you recommend a top coat? Low odor, low VOCs. I'll show you what I'm using. I just sprayed some today. Let me run and get it. I'm coming right back. It's cool with the microphone, I guess you can hear me no matter where I am. So I'm not like a finishing chemist. That's my qualifier. But I do know what I've had good success with. The whole like low VOC thing, I don't know. I honestly don't know. But this stuff, this is a water-based finish. Excuse me. Aquacoat is the manufacturer. They make brushable products. I spray their stuff through my HVLP gun, but it can also be brushed. And it's got, well, here, smell it. Ready? That working? Can you smell it? I used to spray catalyzed lacquer, which is a lacquer thinner based lacquer. The odor was horrific. This stuff has very, very low odor. Like I said, the VOC thing, I don't know. You could ask them. It's available on Amazon. It is a water-based product, so cleanup is really easy. I've used it on a lot of different projects, and I've been really happy with it. Ian says, I love GOA sessions like this. Why do I get so many daily emails? Yeah, I'm with you. There's too many. I don't know. It's a thing. It's just an advertising thing. That it is what it is. Good quality stacked Dado set. CMT, Freud, Infinity. There's 3. Matthew, still not clear on how you transfer a picture of a cutting diagram in a magazine and calculate for the kerf. I'll just play with it. Yeah, don't overthink it. Ron says, any recommendations for a durable finish on an outdoor picnic table? Wood will be beetle kill pine. I'd like to keep the look of the beetle kill so relatively clear. I don't know. I always say I'm not much of a finishing guy. Here's what I would do. I would, Ron, go to, in your area, like Sherwin-Williams is a paint chain. Hirschfield's is around here. I don't know if they're nationwide or not, but I'm pretty sure Sherwin-Williams is. And ask them this very question. There's a couple things, like I think last month somebody said they were like in Arizona and they were asking a question about this. And the part of the deal is that your zone brings so many different facets to the finishing thing that I don't have to deal with. And mine brings aspects to it that you don't have to deal with, like the fact that it's freezing, snowy, sleety rain on April, whatever today is, 11th. But in Arizona, in a month, it's going to be 120 degrees. It is not here. So stuff like, low-hanging fruit is to give you an answer like spar varnish. It's got a pretty strong amber to it, but it's used on ship's masts, so it's highly durable. But there could very well be other products in the marketplace. And that's why I'm saying at a specialty store like a Sherwin-Williams, they're going to have their fingers on the latest good cutting edge finishing technology and make better recommendations for you. Michael says, table saw blades, what do you recommend for a flat bottom cut? Well, this Freud, I've had it for a long time. It is a Freud LM, like Larry Mary, 72R, like rodeo, 010. 24 tooth, rip blade, flat bottom grind. Or, sorry, flat top grind. All right, Brian is sending a link. Yeah, that's the one I showed you. That's this one right here. For Dado's Daddy-O. Can you recommend a good 14-inch bandsaw that accommodates resawing? I've had the, let's do a little walking around just so I'm not boring you to tears standing in one spot. No, 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 no. Come with me to the Casbah. Who said that? Isn't that a movie line? I've had the Laguna 14BX band for, I don't know, quite a while now, long time. So I'm not, you know, in the world of recommending tools, part of the problem is I don't do tool tests. So I'm not out there every day looking at, I mean, Rikon makes a good bandsaw. I'm suddenly drawing a blank on other bandsaw manufacturers. Powermatic makes a really good bandsaw. So I'm not here to say the Laguna outshines all of them, but I can say statistic of one. I've had great success. It's a 14BX. I've had great luck with it. I've cut logs on it that I've cut into lumber. So that's certainly pushing resawing about as hard as you can. I too, while we're betwixt and between, I'm going to say thank you to Tight Bond for sponsoring and keeping this stuff free for everybody. Steven says, what are standard measurements for upper and lower cabinets? Well, uppers are typically 12-inch uppers, 24-inch lowers, if you're talking about kitchen cabinets. And then uppers, if you want to have an upper cabinet and space above it, they're usually 30 inches tall. If you want them to go all the way to the ceiling and suck tight to the ceiling, then typically that's 42 inches tall, but measure your room because that could change a little bit. And then, boy, I got to think a second. Height of the lowers, don't hold me to this. This bench is 34, that's about right. I want to say the cabinet is around 32. And then with 1.5-inch countertop on it, that'd be 33.5. But double check the height of the lowers. But 12 inches deep for uppers, 24 inches deep for lowers. The 30-inch height and 42-inch height for uppers, I'm confident on. Johnny says, don't understand how to use the jig you just demonstrated. Well, I'll give you one more little blow-by-blow here. So let me move the camera. All right. So there's our jig. And we're going to lay that, we're eventually going to have this on there's my monitor in there. We're eventually going to have this on a piece of plywood that we want to cut a dado in, Daddy-O. So let me get something that looks like a piece of plywood. I'm going to do that, and let me see if I can quickly find the right router bit. Okay, that was lucky. This side is fixed to the head, perfectly 90 degrees. So when I put this up against the edge of my plywood and I do this, this is automatically perpendicular to this edge. This leaf is automatically perpendicular. This is the stuff, not plywood, but if we're working with plywood, it would be. This is the stuff I want to cut the dado for. So that goes in between the two leaves. Close this one, lock the wing nut. Do it on this end, close it, lock the wing nut. Now See how snug that is? The distance between these two leaves is exactly the thickness of this material. You do the cutting with, I'm going to zoom if I can get it to stand. You do the cutting with a pattern style router bit like that. On a pattern bit, that's a ball bearing. The ball bearing is exactly the same diameter as the cutter. So now in this gutter, this trough, when I trace this, when I cut it with the router bit, the bearing is going to ride that edge, cut, ride that edge, cut, resulting in a dado that's exactly the width of our stuff. You guys see the, I'm going to run in there and get it because it's cool. If you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen the caricature that a guy did for me. Hang on. It's funny because it figures into the live. The story with it is I taught in Indianapolis a year ago, and a caricaturist was there taking woodworking classes. And then I went back this year, and he handed me a gift, and there it is. Isn't that cool? So he took, I mean, look at the background. Here we are. So he did a screen capture from one of these lives and then drew the caricature over the screen capture. He's a little heavy on Band-Aids on the hands, but but that happens. I had these fingers buddy taped for a long time because of a little unwoodworking related accident, and that's, where is that? That's on that hand right there. The buddy tape is on there. So isn't that cool? You did a great job. Okay. I just built my workbench, outfeed table, and I want to add a T-track system to the top. I noticed the one on your table only runs the width and not the length. I was going to run the length and width. Do you ever wish you had T-track running both ways? So far for me, only crossways has been good. I just watched a little bit of video from John Malecki, really good content creator. He's doing what you're doing, outfeed table and T-track table, and he's got them going both ways. I think, I don't know, if I did this again tomorrow, it would give you more options. I wouldn't be adverse to having long ways, a couple. I think one in the middle wouldn't be right. I think like 1 foot in from this edge and 1 foot in from that edge, this is a 4x8 table, would be about right. So I don't miss it hugely, but if I did this bench again tomorrow, I'd probably put a couple long ways. Thinking of buying a new miter saw. I have a radial arm saw in my shop for cutting wide panels. What are your thoughts on a sliding miter versus bevel saw? I don't know what a bevel saw is. Sliding miter saws are great. I'm looking at mine, 12-inch or so capacity, and I like it way better than way safer than your radial arm saw. Price of consideration, how important is the size of a jointer, 6 versus 8? 8 is better. I had 6-inch jointers in my shop forever, for a really, really long time. So I opened my first shop of my own in '98 and had 6-inch jointers throughout. In 2015, so do the math, however many years that is, I switched to the 8-inch joiner I have now, and I wish I had done it earlier. I always understood the benefit of face jointing, but with a 6-inch joiner, really couldn't do much of that. With the 8-inch joiner, I face joint all the time, and I love it. It does improve the quality of the output because you know you're getting one flat face. Dan says, do you welcome drop-in fans and visitors? Not drop-in, no. Call first, call or email, then we'll figure it out. It's always crazy busy here. I work a lot of hours, so just dropping in isn't a good idea. But people are welcome to come, but I need to know ahead of time if you're gonna. One, I might not be here. I teach out of town about at least once a month. I'm gone, so. We are rocking the Casbah. How do you cut a log for non-bowl lathe work? Non-bowl lathe. So you just want a spindle? Like you want a 2x2? I would do, if you look on GOA.com, there are videos that are logs to lumber. And unfortunately, my log jig, my sled is at the other side of the shop because I had it over there where I was using it. But you need to watch that video, logs to lumber. And on a bandsaw, you can easily rip a log, and then you can, once you've got it sectioned, you can cut it into whatever size blanks you want. But you need that jig to prevent the log from rolling while you're bandsawing it. Can you really trust plywood to be straight edge and square? If not, how do you reliably use a track saw? So no, I never trust plywood to be square or a straight edge. I always eliminate the factory edges from my cuts. So with a track saw, what I would do, so here, this is a 4x8 sheet. This tabletop is a 4x8 bench. So what I would do is look at the other end of the bench, is I start with a square, and from an edge, I'll mark the edge. That's the one I'm starting with. And then I put the square on that edge and draw a line. So my first cut with the T-track, with a track saw, in that direction is on that line, and it's now square to this edge. The reason we mark the edge is because square to this edge doesn't mean we're square to that edge. So we got to keep track of this. Then my next cut on that piece is going to be to take this edge off. I'm going to use a square again in this direction, and I'm going to cut that way. Now I have eliminated the factory edge, and with the track saw I've produced two 90-degree edges. And then from there you can start doing your cutting, whether it's track saw or table saw. Now you've got a 90-degree corner, you can work outward from there, and everything else should come out. I don't have a lathe, and I had to make a 4-foot red oak rod, 2 inches in diameter. Built the router lathe you did a session on after some practice and a bit of reconfiguring and automation, which was always good. It worked out great. Thanks. Yeah, that was a cool, the router, like turning a dowel in a jig with a turn it by hand and then run a router over the top to make it round. It was fun. Jim says Jet makes a great 14-inch bandsaw. That's true, and that's why I was hesitant to start throwing brands out there because I knew I'd forget 8,000 of them. How would you cut dados in the top for the tree track so everything is perfect? Build a jig? No. So when I did this, these T-tracks are almost all 3/8 by 3/4, and the 3/8 doesn't really matter. That's just depth. But all I did was I located the T-track. I wanted it to be here, and then on my router, I put in the 3/4 inch bit. I measured to the edge of the base, and it was some number, 3 inches. So if I wanted the T-track here, I measured over 3 inches, clamped a board as a straight edge, and I just traced let the base of the router run along the edge of that board. And that's how I routed in the track. You don't need to go so far as to build a jig or anything, you just need a straight edge. Big, long fence you can follow. Yeah, AJ's chiming in on the 14-inch bandsaw and then added a riser block. So yeah, they're a good one too. All right. I was scrolling over a little bit just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Rick says, is it necessary to have a standalone planer? Or is your money better spent on other shop tools? It depends. I had 0 planer in my shop for, I don't know, the first couple years I was open. And admittedly, it was a pain to not have, like, if I needed 1/2 inch stock, I was resawing 3/4 inch stock and then using a belt sander to take the bandsaw marks off, and not getting perfectly parallel, perfectly flat faces. There were a lot of downsides to that. You can go without a planer if you can go without a planer, but if you need a planer, then you need a planer. So it depends in large part on what kind of woodworking you're doing, and if you're primarily a lathe person, you probably never need a planer. If you're going to build furniture, you probably almost certainly need a planer. Rodney says, can you talk about finishing green wood so it doesn't split when you're turning on the lathe? Well, so here's what I do. I have, I was looking for my bowl blanks. They're all the way in my garage, so I'm not going to go get them. When I first picked up this log, it was dripping wet green, and I wrapped it. I knew I wasn't going to get to it right away, so I wrap it in stretch film. I have an 18-inch wide roll of stretch film, and I wrap the blank in that, and then I have an unheated space, and the stuff just lives out there. On the plastic, I write the date I brought it in and the moisture content, and then it just sits there and stays wet. So when this went on the lathe, it was dripping wet green. What I do is I turn it start to finish green, and I'm unusual in this, but it works for me. Now, a byproduct of that is stuff like this. See, there's a little split right there, and that doesn't bother me. What happens is that as it dries, it goes a little bit oblong. That doesn't bother me either. It was perfectly round when I was turning it, but then it becomes egg-shaped as it dries. So I just allow that to happen. If you want to treat your stuff, a product you can buy, Rodney, is Pentacryl. Woodcraft sells it. I'm not sure Rockler does, but you can Google it. You can buy the stuff online. Pentacryl is a chemical solution to this problem, which is you soak the blank in Pentacryl before you turn it, and they want you to soak it about a day per inch of thickness of material. So if it's a big blank, it can take a while to soak, but you want to have complete absorption, and what it does is it displaces the water in the wood cells, so as it dries and the wood leaves the cell, they don't collapse. It's collapsing cells that cause distortion and cracking. So Pentacryl is a product that you can apply, and it'll help prevent that cracking and distorting. Difference between Tight Bond 2 and 3. So yeah, I don't have either bottle. Oh, I have a 3. There's a 3. So Tight Bond 2 is water resistant. Tight Bond 3 is waterproof. So good examples of applications would be if you're building like an Adirondack chair and it's gonna be outside and it's gonna get rained on and the sprinkler's gonna run over it or whatever. Tight Bond 2 would be fine for that. If you're gonna build a planter where you're building this wooden box that's gonna have dirt in it and the dirt is gonna be moist most of the time, waterproof, then Tight Bond 3 would be a better choice. If you want to only inventory one thing in your shop, Tight Bond 3 will cover you in all moist applications, where Tight Bond 2 has some limitations. Tight Bond 2 tacks faster, dries faster than Tight Bond 3. Might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the complexity of your project. I think the downside to only stocking Tight Bond 3 is it's a little more expensive than 2. But they're all FDA approved, they're all FDA food safe. If I'm doing cutting boards, I always use 3 on those. Not that I hope nobody immerses them or runs them through a dishwasher, but I want to have that higher level of protection. Stan says, I did the same, wrapping green oak planks in stretch film. Noticed it looks black under the wrap. Thought I had ruined the wood. No, you're probably making it pretty. If I'm watching it and it's starting to look gross in there, it's probably, now there's a finite part of gross, because really gross could be rotten, and You don't want them to get rotten on you. But like I said, this one, when I put it away, this was not spalted. So when I unwrap this, and I'll grab another one before we get out of here. When I unwrap this and then cut into it, cut it round on the bandsaw and saw this, that was cool. So those spores or whatever they are that caused that spalting must have been in there, and then putting it into that hermetically sealed environment allowed them to blossom and bloom. I'll show you this other one. I only recently did this one. I'm climbing to get it. Same thing. This was not dark and cool looking like this when I put it away, but look at the amazing spalting and patterns it has now. And this one, let's see, I think this one sat 2 years before I turned it, and this one was almost 3 years before I turned it. So it's cool. It's a cool aspect of it. I mentioned Pentagrill for bowl blanks. Is it food safe? I would double check with them, with Pentagrill. I don't want to say, because I don't remember. I don't use it that often. I've actually got a huge log cookie soaking in it, and that's a more common application for me. I don't use it on bowls because I just turn them green, and I don't worry about them not distorting. So if you go on Pentagrill's website, which isn't pentagrill.com, it's like antique something, but there's a lot of information on there, also information about how to use it and use it correctly, and I would just check with them. Tight bond 2 on the left side of the laptop. Nope, that's original. The 2 is over there at my gluing and clamping table. Rick says, what's the narrowest blade you can use on a 14-inch bandsaw? Depends on the bandsaw. I've used 1/8-inch blades. I've got a 3/16 on my 14-inch Laguna right now. Tightest radius you'd feel comfortable with that blade on 2-inch material? I don't know. I would try it. I think you could do radius. I think a 3/16 blade on 2-inch material could do a 2-inch radius, maybe less, slow feed, go slowly, because the blade's going to be working hard. You could maybe go smaller. You just have to experiment with it. I'm not 100% sure. Terrence says, I'm in the process of buying a jointer for my workshop. Would a 6-inch benchtop jointer be a good buy? Sorry, I have to cough. I had a 6-inch Delta benchtop for a long time that I used in classes. It worked fine. It's a really short bed. So we talked earlier about short bed limits the length of material that you can edge joint. But if you're primarily working with short stuff, that'll be fine. All right, folks, we have hit 8:05. I wanted to go a little past our normal closing time of 8 because we had some problems at the beginning and started a little bit late. Sorry about that. Let's do a little bit of Where's Waldo? What are we in? April, right? Yeah, April, May. So May, Weekend with Wood for me. Weekend with Wood in Des Moines. If you're signed up, I'll see you there. If you're not registered, sorry, but the whole event is sold out. And all my sessions are full there. And then in June, this just got added. So I'll be back in Chicago June 15th and 16th. It's a Saturday and Sunday. Maybe it's the 16th and 17th. I'm going to look quick so I don't tell you wrong. Whatever the Saturday and Sunday are. So I'm going to be at the Rockler store in Bolingbrook, Illinois. I'm quickly getting to June here. Yeah, the 15th is a Saturday. So I'm going to be in Chicago at one of the Rockler stores on the 15th of June, at the other Rockler store in Orland Park on the 16th of June, morning session at 1, afternoon session at the other, logs to lumber. one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to show up with a 12-inch diameter, 30-inch long log, and we're going to push that through a bandsaw, cut it into planks, talk about what it takes to cut the log, drying the material, all sorts of stuff. And then that's June, July, August. So yeah, I think that's it for my current on-the-road teaching gigs. So folks, thanks very much for watching. April, May, so we'll see you in May when we come back and do this again. Don't forget that we've got Facebook Lives that are every 2 weeks, 11 o'clock in the morning. Today's was bandsaw dovetails, so those topics vary. There's a set instruction, there's a set lesson I'm doing in each of those. So anyway, go ahead, Sam, and punch us out, and I will see you folks in a month or so. Thanks to Type On.